What's up, everybody? The first week of the NBA season has finally come to a close. It was a great week. I hope everybody had some success with your fantasy teams this week. Today, we're going to be going into the top performances of the week. And with great performances also comes great disappointment. We will be going over the disappointments this week, and we'll also be talking about some surprise performances from players that you didn't expect to put up some good production. If you're new to Ballin' Fantasy with NKB, I'm your fantasy guide, NKB, and all season long we're going to be talking about fantasy tips and tricks. So go ahead, leave a like, subscribe to this channel, and let's get into this video. So first thing that we're going to get into is the disappointments. We want to get the negative out the way in the beginning. And we're going to be talking about the players that you picked in the higher rounds of your draft. When you pick them that high, you want them to do great from the start to the finish. These players, unfortunately, did not come to play this week. And first person on the list is Chris Paul. Chris Paul is a person that I personally drafted in the second round of one of my drafts. When we first drafted him, we knew that he had a lingering ankle issue, but all things pointed towards he was getting over it. When he came out in that first game, he didn't look good, basically. He got you 11 assists, but when he was out there on the floor, he did not look like the normal Chris Paul. We knew that it would be some growing pains with him and James Harden out on the floor together. They both need the ball, but Chris Paul just looked kind of lost out there. Figured that he could play the wings, get some threes up, but he didn't do any of that. He only got 11 assists, didn't get that many points, just really wasn't involved that much in the game at all. After that, he went down with an ankle injury. That ankle injury that he had pre-fantasy draft was still lingering, and apparently it got a little bit worse, and he didn't play the rest of the 2 games for the week. So he's at the bottom of the list because you don't want to give a player too much flack for being injured. It's not their fault that they can't be on the floor and get you your production, but Chris Paul is on the disappointments list. Next player on the list is Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Buckets. He didn't play too bad this week. I mean, he didn't really give you any complete duds, but he still didn't put up the type of production that you would expect from Jimmy Butler with all the hype around him going over to Minnesota and him taking that team to the promised land. Like I said, he didn't give you any duds, but his production just was kind of mediocre. You can expect some growing pains from Jimmy Butler going to a new team in Minnesota. And the team does have lots of scoring wings with Andrew Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, and you also had Jeff Teague running the point, kind of a scoring guard. So after his performances this week, I'm not too worried. I do feel like he would get it figured out. But for the games that he did play, he had averages of 13 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, and 3 turnovers. Poor percentages, right on 40% field goal percentage. Those really aren't great numbers for a person that you picked in the high second rounds and drafts. So I do think he'll get better, but this week just wasn't the week. It is the first week, so there were some growing pains. Now, the last person on this list taking home the crown of the disappointments this week is Nikola Jokic. On the rise player last year, moved his way all the way up to the first round of drafts this year, and he gave you absolute duds this week. He did have some categories where he did provide, such as assists through the 2 games that he played. And again, only 2 games this week, which that in itself is a disappointment. But I mean, that's not his fault that his team only played 2 games this week. But in those 2 games, really didn't give you first round production that you were expecting. Again, this is the first week. We do expect him to be a lot better, do expect him to return to being an elite fantasy player. But on the week, averaging about 7 assists, which is really good. That's what we expect from him. The rebounds and the points, the steals and blocks, they just weren't there, and he had a bunch of turnovers. I think he had about 3 turnovers, and his points, first game, he got 7 points. Second game, he got a 0 points. So through those 2 games, he's only averaging 3.5 points. His percentages, his field goal percentage, since he got so little points, is sub 30%, which is terrible, but on only 2 games. So for this week, Nikola Jokic, your first round pick, gets the crown of disappointments for this week. Again, we expect him to return to his normal averages going forward and being that elite fantasy player. So do not overreact and sell low. Now, let's talk about the surprise performances from players this week. First person that I'm going to talk about is Darren Collison. Darren Collison had a very, very solid week. Darren Collison has always been a really solid point guard when he had the opportunity to get starting minutes. And right now he's the starter in Indiana. He's getting his 30 minutes per game. So he is the clear cut starting point guard for Indiana, and he's putting up solid production. Over the last 3 games, he's averaging 15 points, solid 7.7 assists. He's only averaging 1 turnover, which is really good. Really good assist to turnover ratio. 57% shooting. He's getting you a steal. He's getting you a little over 1-3 a game. I mean, that's all you can ask for a point guard that people are drafting at the back end of drafts, sometimes even in the double-digit rounds. So Darren Collison had a really solid week. Don't see why that production would dip off. If anything, it'll fluctuate between really good and to mediocre, and average out to somewhere around being really solid. So Darren Collison this week, solid. Another person is DeMarre Carroll for the Brooklyn Nets. Honestly, the whole Nets team has been putting up really good production this week. I don't know what's going on, but with fantasy, we know opportunity is the main thing, and those guys that are on the Nets have opportunity to just get out there and run and play ball. They actually played really well this week. I'm highlighting DeMarre Carroll over the other guys on that team because we know that DeMarre Carroll from past years can be a really, really good fantasy asset. He was really good when he was in his Atlanta days. He kind of dipped off in the years between then, but right now he's looking like he's returning back to form, and he's giving you really, really good production. Right now, through 3 games, he's averaging almost 15 points per game. He's getting you almost 2 steals, a block, a little over 2 3-pointers made, 6 rebounds, and low turnovers, around a little over 1 turnover. So that is really, really good production from DeMarre Carroll. And leagues he was actually going undrafted. Go check if DeMarre Carroll has been picked up in your league. Hopefully he can retain this production and he'll be a great fantasy asset to your team. Next on the list is Robin Lopez. He's always been a solid center, in my opinion, even for fantasy. He does the dirty work. He gets you your rebounds, gets you blocks, which is pretty much what all you can ask for from your center that you are drafting way in the later rounds. But this week he's been adding to it in the offensive categories. He's been getting you points, and he actually hit 1 3 in one of his games, which is unheard of from him. So through 2 games, he's averaging a whopping 17 points, which is really good for Robin. He's getting you almost 2 blocks, 2 assists, which is also nice, almost 8 rebounds, which I think he will improve on, 52% from the field. And like I said, he hit that 1 3, so he's averaging 0.5 3-pointers made per game, and don't expect that too much in the future. But Robin Lopez, really solid. One guy that really surprised me this week with the production that he put up is Mr. Down Under, Joe Ingles. I did not expect him to put up these numbers, but I'm pretty sure all the Jazz fans out there, they knew what he was capable of. Through 3 games, he has been splashing threes. He averages a whopping 4 3-pointers made per game. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing, how many points you're averaging. If you're getting 4 3-pointers made, which means you're going to be averaging 12 points, but if you're getting 4 3-pointers made per game, you are a very, very lucrative fantasy asset. So he's putting up 4 threes per game, 15 points, almost 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, which is also very good. And he's doing all of this on 64% field goal shooting. So that is really, really amazing. I dare to say it's kind of anomalous, but I got to go and look at the previous numbers to see if this is a trend that he can kind of keep up. Obviously, that he's not going to maintain that throughout the season. I don't think it's not very possible. But if he does, you got yourself a steal right there. So Joe Ingles, really, really good production. And the last person that I'm going to talk about is Nikola Vucevic, the person that we all know can fill it up in the stat sheet. Just looking at his numbers and just looking at his rank in standard leagues right now, he is ranked number 1. And yes, that is number 1 above Giannis Antetokounmpo, which if you're following basketball at all, you know he is killing the league right now. So if Vucevic is number 1 over Giannis, he must be doing something right, and he gets the crown of top surprise performance this week. Even though we all know Vucevic can fill it up, but being over Giannis after the week that Giannis had, that's really something to be looked at. So let's talk about the numbers that he put up over the last 3 games. He's averaging almost 28 points per game, 10 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 3 3-pointers made. After listening to those stats, I can see why he's above Giannis. I think the only reason he's above Giannis this week being number 1 is that he has those 3-pointers made, while Giannis only made about 2 3-pointers this week out of his enormous games. So there you go, Nikola Vucevic, number 1 this week. I don't expect him to maintain that number 1 spot, but he is honestly an elite fantasy asset. He doesn't really get enough love for being such an amazing basketball player and fantasy asset. All right, now let's talk about the elite of the elite this week. We're going to be going over the top performances, and that's top fantasy statistical lines. I'm just going to be talking about the top 5 from this week. At number 5, we have Mr. Lonzo Ball up against the Suns. He dropped 29 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, had 2 steals and 4 3-pointers made. The percentages weren't that great, field goal percentage and free throw percentage, and I think he had about 3 or 4 turnovers. Just coming back off that terrible first game and just having the resilience to come out and play like that and get your team to win, I think he has to be at least on this list for top performances. And all things considered, it really was a good fantasy line. Almost had a triple-double, had stats across the board. I think he deserves to be on this list. Next, we have my boy Otto Porter Jr. Just got the huge contract, which is debatable if he deserved it. But after this performances, there's no doubt he is totally capable of performing up to those standards. And this week, he put up a fantasy line of 28 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 steals, 2 3-pointers made, only 1 turnover, 50% from the field, 100% from the free throw line. That's about as perfect of a fantasy game that you can have. He only got you your positive categories all across the board. I forgot he also had 1 block in that game. So just across the board, almost near perfect fantasy line from Otto Porter. I'm looking so forward to much more of that this season for my Washington Wizards. Up next, we have Anthony Davis, and he played 3 games this week. And honestly, I could have chosen any one of the stat lines from those 3 games, and it would have totally been acceptable to be put on this list. But I chose the game where he played up against the Golden State Warriors, and he had a line of 35 points, 17 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, 3 3-pointers made on 70% field goal shooting. He did have a bad free throw line with 40%, and he did have 4 turnovers. But with production like that across the board, you really don't care about those negative categories because he just does everything, and he puts up gaudy numbers. He's putting them up in bunches. So there you go with Anthony Davis against the Golden State Warriors. Really solid line. And number 1 on the top statistical fantasy lines for this week, we have Giannis Antetokounmpo. And just like Anthony Davis, he played 3 games, and I could have chosen any of those 3 stat lines, and that would have been applicable to this list. But I had to choose the game where he dropped 44 on, I can't remember who they played, but he dropped 44, and it was a game where he, in the last 30 seconds of the game, he absolutely took over, got a steal, a dunk, and then came back and defended the paint, got a block, all in 30 seconds to win that game. It was just an amazing performance. And his stat line was 44 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, 2 turnovers, and 1 3-pointer made on 74% field goal shooting and 70% free throw shooting. So really, really amazing line from Giannis. And that takes us into our overall top fantasy performer of this week. And it is, you guessed it, Giannis Antetokounmpo. This dude is a freak of nature. His name is the Greek Freak, as you probably know. And we all knew he was going to come in and do really well, but he just came out like gangbusters. It's like he's ready to just take over the league, honestly. And if this is the beginning, I do not want to see what he does to the league. And it's going to be crazy. I cannot wait to see what Giannis does. Giannis, top fantasy performer of week 1. And that's it for this video, guys. Again, if you like the video, leave a like, Let me know how your fantasy team did this week. If you want to get fantasy basketball tips and advice, just fantasy basketball news all year long, go ahead, subscribe, and I will keep it going every week. I'm going to try to put out as much content as I can, and I'll see you all in the next video.